Gingivitis has been eroding the gum line of this great nation long enough. We can no longer be a nation indentured. Our very salivation is at stake.
You let one ant stand up to us, then they all might stand up. And if they ever figure that out, there goes our way of life.
Krusty Krab is unfair. Mr. Krabs is in there, standing at the concession, plotting his oppression.
We can't just have a march and rally and then go have a beer.
Life in this society, being at best another bore. There remains the civic-minded, thrill-seeking, responsible females, only to overthrow the government, eliminate the money system, institute complete automation, and destroy the male sex.
You picked the wrong femboy to mess with.
Go to the Bureau of Free Love. It's not like a free love Soviet. The bureaucracy, you got to fill out this paperwork. Well, when do I get the free love? You got to fill this up and you got to come back next Tuesday. You got to interview. It's a bureaucracy. But it's free love in the end.
Lucario is a spiritualist, possible Jill Stein voter. Ness and Lucas are in Japan. Hey, there's politics outside the U.S., There's left-wing movements all over the world, okay? And I just think that's important. Sonic could be an accelerationist, and Jigglypuff, intersectional feminist queen.
Oh, sure, let's see. I'm an elk, a mason, a communist. I'm the president of the Gay and Lesbian Alliance for some reason.
There's nothing new about poverty. What is new is that we now have the techniques and the resources to get rid of poverty. The real question is whether we have the will.
Welcome, welcome. This is your live edition of the Three Left Show, live in the studio. I'm your host, Dan Platt. This is the Three Lefts, your leftist reading hour that covers news and issues from a left-wing perspective, from the perspectives of anarchism, socialism, and ecology. These are the three lefts, promoting a post-capitalist future with a commons economy and direct democracy, and other such hot-button issues. This episode is one of the last few 2-hour episodes I'm going to do where I go through all of the extra content I've collected. This episode, this time, I'm wrapping up what I call the left-wing culture war, which maybe I'll get to the final conclusion that there is no inter-left culture war. There is simply culture war between left and right, or the three-way fight of left, liberal, and right. But really, I like this one meme that I will put in the show notes or something like that, where it's kind of a food web style graphic with the words liberal, conservative, and libertarian, and they all have different arrows pointing at each other. A liberal gets mugged, they become a conservative. Maybe you've heard this little trope before. Conservative gets medical bill, they turn into a liberal. Liberal has to pay taxes, they turn into a libertarian. Libertarian opposes, wants to go to war, so they become a conservative. The theme, or rather the message behind it, is that these three ideologies are actually all parts of the status quo, and that the only way to kind of break free of that is to be a leftist like myself. But that's just a little bit of, arrogance there. So first I'm going to start the show. So I've covered left-wing culture war issues before, usually talking about sexuality, culture, other such things. I'm returning to TERF, that's trans exclusionary radical feminism, or types of feminism that are actually very reactionary, or types of leftism that become very reactionary. In the last episode, I kind of covered such tropes with the ultra-left, where, their takes are like, for the sake of a multipolar world, we actually want, in fighting U.S. imperialism and those evils, we actually want other states like China and Russia to be as powerful as they can be, to influence others and have a sphere of influence that counteracts, or at least to have some international competition so that there isn't just one hegemon ruling the world in that evil one world government kind of way. Instead of the good one world government kind of way where it's democratic and, well, for the people, aka socialist. Or at least it loans money not based on the ability to pay back or what have you, or other kinds of strings or giving up one's rights, but actually based on need. But I wanted to cover not giving my take. So this weekend was the Oscars, and there's this incident where Will Smith slapped Chris Rock. And there's obviously lots of takes. It's my social media feed has been inundated. So it's a nice little distraction from all of the things to worry about, whether it be that we have high temperature spikes on both Arctic and Antarctic poles, and war, and the general incoming economic crash that we're all just kind of tensing up, bracing for. So, but I'm not giving my take. I like this one leftist take that was we can just enjoy things. It's a little bit of fun, celebrity drama. But a lot of people are just reflecting kind of how they feel about it based on their own experiences, right? My, old friend of mine, kind of like she was, when she was younger, she had cancer, so she was balding. And so this hits her, like, yeah, she felt insulted. She would be insulted too. Others are reflecting. By reflecting, I mean, like, someone's saying, like, I'm very upset. And you reflect back, it sounds like you're upset. I'm just going to relate what came to my mind. First, this played in my head.
Couldn't get in, huh? What you need is a tough hairdo. No one gets into the double S without a tough hairdo.
I disagree. I saw a guy going in there and he was bald.
I saw that guy. He wasn't bald. He had a shaved head. Shaved. That's a hairdo. Case closed.
So the joke there is that, I look at Jada Smith and I see someone with a shaved head and shaved, not balding. Perhaps Chris Rock as a roaster, someone roasting the front row, the people who are actually going to get the awards. You made a crack with like, oh, shaved head. What else has a shaved head? A Marine. So G.I. Jane. But otherwise, that's my interpretation. The other side of it is the other thing I thought of that came to mind immediately was that, hey, Chris Rock actually made a movie about black women's hair. It's called Good Hair. Here's the trailer for it.
What's your definition of good hair?
Something that looks relaxed and nice.
If your hair is relaxed, white people are relaxed. Your hair is nappy, they're not happy. Oh, God.
This October, Chris Rock will take you back to your roots.
Just yesterday, my daughter came into the house and said, Daddy, how come I don't have good hair? I wonder how she came up with that idea.
Within the black community, if you have good hair, you're prettier or better than. The lighter, the brighter, the better.
They want to go like this, like Farrah Fawcett.
There's so many pressures to straighten your hair.
Look at my ring, still there. Relax is the chemical that will take a black woman's hair from this and change it into this.
It's kind of like a torture session.
Could you tell us how dangerous relaxer is?
Sodium hydroxide will burn through your skin.
So that can's got a good purr.
This whole side was burnt off, and that's how the asymmetrical look came in with salt and pepper.
So you saying your hair's addicted to relaxer?
I am on the creamy crack.
Creamy crack.
So what's in your hair now?
This is a weave.
This is a weave. 2 pieces here, like extensions. Like that.
The black hair business is a $9 billion business.
One of these can run you $5,000.
Well, I have a layaway plan, so you can lay away the weave. That's right. Have you ever put your hand through a black woman's hair?
Hell no, not a black woman.
You just don't touch it. Do not touch my weave.
No. Does your wife let you touch her hair?
The question is, do I let her touch mine?
Weave sex is a little awkward.
What do you do?
I guess
that was
stay
Irving
on top.
Sharkman, by the way.
This is a 7,000-pound batch of relaxer.
This will last Prince about a month.
Get ready to go around the world.
Right now, I have Indian hair.
Human hair is India's biggest export.
Minimum 10 inch to 40.
10 inches and better.
Yes.
It's like porno. Tell me.
Okay, so I'll stop it there. It's just 10 more seconds with a little joke about him not being able. Wigs are expensive, but he can't sell them on the street, or rather, it's natural black women's hair. Like, I did not watch the whole thing, or maybe I watched the second half of it. I kind of forget, but I watched enough of it. It was kind of like when I shop for books where I read the intro and then the last chapter, just give me the sandwich, the bookends. The beginning where they give their first thesis and then the conclusion, like, okay, what's the point of this? Where do we go from here? Because a lot of books, the nonfiction ones are like, talking about a problem, and sometimes I already know about the problem. Okay, what do they want to do about the problem? So I skip to the end, and in the end, he ends the movie with a fun little thing where it's like, I want my daughters to grow up valued for the content of the character and not the content of what's on their head. So I'm just having a little fun, like many others, but also very serious discussion. We're trying to rationalize an irrational act, which is not so fun or needed, but what have you. So I just want to have some fun with that before I go into the more unfun topic of TERFs and other such reactionaries that poses leftists. So to the public, it kind of looks like an inter-left rivalry thing, or at least this is how I see it. But I'll get to the point where it actually does affect left-wing politics in the second half as I talk about the Greens. And I will have a kind of major point at the end where I kind of wrap things up and not leave things open-ended. Like I sort of did where when I did episodes of clip shows, of YouTube videos, and along with like the left needs to unite, the left needs to be well organized. Why is it splitting hairs over various issues when we're so not alone? There are masses of us. And then I included a video where someone explains like, yeah, but what about these people who are, say, anti-sex work or anti-trans rights or anti-trans people in the first place, don't even recognize them as existing, and that these people should not be allowed in our movements or what have you because they are pretty much toxic. But I haven't gone deep into it. So this will be the episode where I finally go deep into it and do a last hurrah on this topic. So first, a general outline. It will be too long to read all of this. I think the first half is how far I got before I'm like, okay, this is a wrap. I want to wrap this up. But anyway, this is from Vox. I don't love Vox as a source for news and stuff, but you know what? It's fine, especially on these social issues and cultural things. So first, a little premises from me that culture is a real thing. Like when something is culturally constructed, we still live it. It is still real to us. Just because it's like, saying something is socially constructed is not the same as saying it's fake or unreal. Just as it's like there's maybe some hyper reality to it, like the people couldn't believe that, like, Will Smith is like acting out a scene from a movie and, or it looked like something that was staged. And it's like, is this real? Is this not real? We can't tell. It's hyper reality. It's hyper real. So the rise of anti-trans radical, in quotes, feminists explained. This is just a general explainer, very broad article, which goes pretty deep. Known as TERFs, trans exclusionary radical feminist groups are working with conservatives to push their anti-trans agenda. Not a very not positive article, of course, positive towards them. I will read some things from their perspective just to get it across. This isn't just a TERF bashing hour, but whatever. No apologies. Written by Caitlin Burns. So, okay, first it goes through a court case that's pretty emblematic of what's going on, because this does affect real people. This isn't just on online spaces where people argue about this. It does affect real people's lives on many fronts. So Amy Steffens, had been working in funeral services for 20 years, nearly 6 of which were at Harris Funeral Homes, when she came out to her boss as transgender. She had known since she was 5 years old that she was a girl and had been living as a woman outside of work for some time. Though she loved her job at Harris, where she had worked her way up from apprentice to funeral director, she felt she had to hide who she was there until she couldn't any longer. In 2013, she gave the funeral home's owner, Thomas Rost, a note that she also shared with friends and colleagues, quoting it. I realize that some of you may have some trouble understanding this. In truth, I have had to live with it every day of my life, and even I do not fully understand it myself. As distressing as this is sure to be friends and some of my family, I need to do this for myself and for my own peace of mind, and to end the agony in my soul. After he read the note, Ross simply said, okay, and then fired Steffens 2 weeks later. Ross told her that it was not going to work out. Why? You can't have a woman funeral director? Let's see. Steffens sued, claiming her dismissal was discrimination based on the basis of her sex, setting off a flurry of legal activity. According to court documents, Ross testified that he fired Steffens because, quote, she was no longer going to represent herself as a man. She wanted to dress as a woman. Last March, the Sixth Circuit Court of Appeals ruled in her favor. Quoting that decision, "It is analytically impossible to fire an employee based on that employee's status as a transgender person without being motivated, at least in part, by the employee's sex." The court said in its decision, "An employer cannot discriminate on the basis of transgender status out imposing its stereotypical notions of how sexual organs and gender identity ought to align." Harris Funeral Homes appealed to the Supreme Court, which took up the case and will hear oral arguments October 8th. This is back in 2019. This was published, by the way. Sorry I didn't get that out earlier. So I may need to put in the show notes what the result of that decision was. But maybe that's what really got the last few years of TERFism up, and because there was a court case that actually said that a transgender person is discriminated against based on sex. And these are sex-based rights, as the trans people put it. Or the gender critical, because it's about sex, not gender. Women are discriminated based on sex, not gender. And thus the courts have ruled, or at least one court did, that, as I read, they're discriminated based on sex. So, how anti-trans radical feminist groups could affect the outcome of this case. In recent weeks, a flurry of amicus briefs have been filed in the case. It's listing out the company's name, Harris Funeral Homes versus EEOC and Amy Steffens. Major medical organizations, advocacy groups, and legal experts have weighed in mostly in favor of allowing trans people to be free of discrimination at work. Meanwhile, a slew of conservative and religious groups have claimed the right to fire anyone for being trans because they love freedom. Even President Trump's Department of Justice filed a brief in August arguing in part that Steffens was fired by Harris Funeral Homes not for her gender identity, but because she refused to follow her employer's dress code, which requires men, and by quoting quote-unquote men, the DOJ means men of biological sex, to wear a suit with pants and women to wear a dress or a skirt, which is kind of the problem in the first place, isn't it? The ACLU attorneys representing Steffens in turn argue that their client was fired because Steffens failed to perform the sex role her employer expected of her, violating the legal precedent established in the 1989 case Prince Waterhouse versus Hopkins. So in that case, Ann Hopkins was denied promotions and a partnership because she didn't look, dress, or behave in the stereotypical feminine manner. She was not feminine enough for her sex, being a woman. Her bosses instructed her to wear more makeup and skirts to work in order to get the promotion. The court sided with Hopkins, establishing a legal standard for sex stereotyping that has fundamentally transformed the workplace for women for the past 30 years. That's about when my mother stopped wearing shoulder pads on her work jackets. Not quite, it was more mid-90s, but it started the ball rolling of women not having to look more masculine to work in an office and be taken and be treated as equals. So what I'm outlining here is that what's happening is the eroding of gender roles based on sex. Perhaps gender roles can still exist, femininity and masculinity, but what is being disentangled here is that they are no longer, either matter or not useful for, it's a breakdown of patriarchal values, which is a good thing. But it's disjointing sex and gender roles and particularly eroding the gender roles. So now that precedent is being put to the test. And joining the Trump administration and conservatives in the fight over sex-based discrimination and stereotypes are several somewhat unexpected allies, so-called radical feminist groups with long records of opposing the rights of transgender people. In their amicus brief to the Supreme Court, the Women's Liberation Front, or WOLF, writes simply, Amy Steffens is a man. He wanted to wear a skirt while at work, and his, quote, gender identity argument is an ideology that dictates that people who wear skirts must be women, precisely the type of sex stereotyping forbidden by Price Waterhouse. Doesn't that sound ass backwards? I don't know. Groups like WOLF are commonly referred to as trans exclusionary radical feminists, TERFs, Or, yes, they alternate among several theories that all claim that trans women are really men who are the ultimate oppressors of women. Their theories are that men are the ultimate oppressors of women, right? Above all others, or because all the others aren't as important. Most of their ideas, like that trans women are a threat to cisgender women's safety, are based on cherry-picked cases of horrific behavior by a small number of trans people. Above all else, their ideology doesn't allow for trans people to have self-definition or any autonomy over their gender expression. Keep that in mind. And why this line of thinking is not really, not pro-freedom, not pro-fun. By that I mean human happiness. It's like, ultimately, that is why autonomy is important. Quoting them, sex is grounded in materiality, whereas gender identity is simply an ideology that has no grounding in science, Wolf told Vox in a statement. The redefinition of the word sex to mean gender identity would have myriad harmful effects on women and girls, and women and girls as a distinct category deserve civil rights protections. This is all of their literature, which will be mentioned later. At least it's paraphrasing it. The key to understanding why a self-proclaimed radical feminist group would side with conservatives arguing for the right to force cisgender women into skirts at work is to understand who TERFs are and what they've been up to the past 50 years. Because now, under the Trump administration, and Biden, whatever, and a conservative majority Supreme Court, their alliance with these far-right groups could have lasting, widespread consequences for trans civil rights and for the rights of women in general. So here's a primer. Online roots of the term TERF originated in the late aughts, that's 2000s, but grew out of the 1970s radical feminist circles after it became apparent that there needed to be a term to separate those radical feminists who support trans women and those who don't. Many anti-trans feminists today claim it's a slur, despite what many see as an accurate description of their beliefs. They now prefer to call themselves gender critical, a euphemism akin to white supremacists calling themselves race realists. If you want a full pseudo documentary about gender critical, the YouTuber ContraPoints has done lots of content on these subjects and is a great source for that. In the early 70s, groups of what would now be called gender critical feminists threatened violence against many trans women who dared exist in women's and lesbian spaces. For example, because they said that their presence there was like an act of violence as well, a man in a woman's space. This is what they say about women need to be this distinct category and it needs to be a sex-based category and so on. For example, trans woman Beth Elliott, who was at the 1973 West Coast Lesbian Feminist Conference to perform with her lesbian band, was ridiculed on stage and had her existence protested. In 79, radical feminist Janice Raymond, a professor at the University of Massachusetts, wrote the defining work of the TERF movement, which was called Transsexual Empire, the Making of the She-Male, in which he argued that transsexualism should be morally mandated out of existence, mainly by restricting access to transition care, which is a political position of the right. Soon after, she wrote another paper, this one published for the government-funded Health and Human Services-linked National Center for Healthcare Technology. The Reagan administration cut off Medicare and private health insurance coverage for transition-related care. When the right was in power, or is in power, they kind of get what they want. Or they have a empathetic ear. After those early flashpoints, the dispute between trans people and gender-critical folks simmered for the next 20 years. One exception was the high-profile conflicts at the Michigan Women's Folk Festival, or Mitch Fest, which caught plenty of attention. In the 90s and early aughts, pro-trans festival attendees organized a Camp Trans, a space specifically welcoming trans women who were otherwise banned from attending the event. The two groups clashed for a number of years until more artists and organizations boycotted Mitch Fest, and organizers chose to end the event in 2015. Now, reading this suggests that the Michigan Women's Folk Festival didn't allow men in at all. So much for having building an inclusive society. Yeah, women's only spaces for women's safety, so on and so on. I'm not against it, but it does can't say it puts me off because, I never say this space is only for men unless it's me and my guy friends and we're out on a camping trip and that's a man only space. but that's not a publicly organized thing. Okay, so however, in the past several years, TERFs have found new life and fostered fertile recruiting ground in many online spaces. Post Gamergate and working out of the skeptic movement, the recent wave grew out of the 2000 skeptic movement. There's a lot of different explanation. So TERFs usually use a fear of sexual assault, and at the end of the day, if you can't tell so far, they are reactionary and at its core, actually anti-women. Let's see if I can skip to the part that explains that. They treat trans women as predators and trans men as victims of the patriarchy. Let's go through that part. They use fear as a weapon against trans women, fear of sexual assaults. Gender critical propaganda is almost entirely focused on the supposed depravity of trans women, citing rare cases to paint them as threats, which the right also does too, as they did to all gay, lesbian, and other communities, and basically any non-conforming community. TERFs often point to the case of Karen White. White was in prison for sexual assault when she came out as a trans woman and applied to a transfer to a women's one. Once there, she allegedly raped several other fellow prisoners before she was eventually caught. Prison officials later admitted that they did not follow existing safeguarding procedures in granting the transfer. As a rape survivor myself, I find White detestable and am outraged that prison officials were so lax with their procedures and allowed White access to a vulnerable population. Where I differ from gender-critical feminists is I don't agree that White is representative of all or any trans women. Gender-critical feminists essentially believe the existence of trans women's penis stuff in a woman's space represents an automatic risk of rape. These are how stereotypes are weaponized against marginalized groups. Gillian Brandstetter, Media Relations Manager at the National Center for Transgender Equality, told Vox, who was interviewed, given transgender people's relatively recent rise to public life and the fact that many people still don't know a transgender person, we're very vulnerable to being mischaracterized, to being marginalized, and to being drowned out by dog whistles. Many gender-critical feminists refuse to contend with the fact that 47% of trans women have been victims of sexual assault in their lives. Almost half. Instead of questioning the survey methods used to reach the conclusion, however, many trans people don't see how such questioning is any different from cis men who claim women are falsely accusing men of rape in ever larger numbers. The supposed concern for cis women and children has become the primary method for radicalizing others to being gender critical. Similar to how Islamophobes play up threats of gang rape of white women by Muslim men, or white supremacists have historically painted black men as sexual threats to justify segregation, or say sex segregation or gender segregation in our spaces or bathrooms. I'm adding that. Defending the purity of white womanhood has always been a significant axis of common bigotries, and gender-critical feminism operates in the same fashion. A type of stranger danger drilled into the heads of women and girls from a young age, anti-trans feminists can easily paint the other as a constant sexual threat, despite the fact that studies have repeatedly shown that women are most likely to be assaulted by someone they already know. So, let's see, online TERFism infiltrates academia and then often manifests into more harassment. Groups like Wolf may have liberation in their name, but they have ultra-conservative ties, and it goes through those. And it doesn't have much traction in the U.S., but it definitely does in the U.K. I'll be hitting on that later. Here we go. Conservative groups, in turn, have made a conscious decision to use feminist language and framing to oppose trans rights, which is how we ended up some of the most vehemently anti-women politicians in the House voting against the Violence Against Women Act in the name of protecting women and girls. This unholy alliance, backed up with academic scholarship written by TERFs, could end up having devastating consequences to the standing of women and girls in the U.S. and across the globe. In the Supreme Court case, Wolf is taking the side that claims employers have the right to mandate that women wear skirts by arguing that Amy Steffens believes that only women can wear skirts. If Wolf truly believes that the abolition of gender, as it claims, It would be petitioning to allow Steffens to present at work in whatever gender she wishes without risk of being fired. Wolf's argument reveals the big gender-critical lie. It's more important to TERFs to put cis women in a stricter box and enforce sex-based dress codes than it is to give trans women equal employment rights. And if TERFs prevail, then all women and non-binary people lose. Caitlin Burns is a freelance journalist based in D.C. She was the first openly transgender Capitol Hill reporter in U.S. history. Her other work can be seen in the Washington Post, Teen Vogue, Vice, and others. The next section of this is to basically kind of continue with this line of thinking, a line of attack, whatever, line of analysis. With this piece, which reflects on something that happened last year, or at least an online kerfuffle argument that occurred last on the line, on pretty much online spaces only, but it is it's basically where the culture war is being fought. And we can obviously have that, I kind of roll my eyes whenever I see memes or someone talk about how like culture war is just a distraction from the class war. Certainly, but it's also kind of another battlefield where things play out. And you don't want to give any of that up, but it's also, I don't see it mutually exclusive to fight things on a cultural because really we're not fighting on a cultural level. As I mentioned, the case in protecting women's sex-based rights or transgender rights, these are material economic things. We're actually talking about worker rights. And if we're going to protect worker rights, we need to protect everyone's rights. Otherwise, it's not much of a leftism, is it? And to drive that point on, here is a piece the blog is called The Black Trillium, and is written by Simon McNeil. Published May 26, 2021, and I'll just go right into it. The title is Nazis, Puritans, and Accessibility, the Pointless Kink at Pride Discourse. I'm self-censoring here, but basically I'm going to be using the words kink and sexuality at the very least. So here's one for the terminally online. Before we go forward, I want to position my stakes in this argument. I'm pretty open on this blog about being bisexual. I mean, for the 16 reviews I wrote in 2021, 7 have either featured a textually queer protagonist, were created by a queer artist, or both. But I'm also a parent, and this is why 4 of the 16 2021 reviews have been of children's media. And as such, I am a cause of kids at Pride parades, as prior to COVID anyway, I regularly brought my daughter to Pride. So I don't know if you remember. If you don't, here's the background. Last year, there was a online debate between various quote-unquote factions or peoples on the left about allowing kids at Pride parades. Why would this be something to discuss? Well, because at Pride parades, people they evoke their sexuality or they express their sexuality, not literally having it or what have you, or just wearing less clothes, dressing in a promiscuous way, or basically it's an argument about, Puritan values versus libertine values. And where's the line that's appropriate for having kids around? It can be argued by the most regressive that someone just being outside and saying I'm gay is a stretch too far for the kids. Kids should not be exposed to these identities, whether it be sexual, gender identities, or any kind, because they all invoke these questions about, my sexuality or my gender or my place in society. Am I non-conforming? It's all, and so on. And you don't have to be non-conforming but it is a non-conforming thing to be in public and not being fully clothed or wearing a bikini, what have you. Now, another important question is why I want to bring my daughter to Pride parades. And the answer to that is because I want her to grow up with a broad understanding of the ways love and enjoyment of others can manifest. I want to raise a child who understands these things well so that she can make healthy choices about her own life that will forward her happiness. I'm not bringing my daughter to Pride just for a parade with a bunch of rainbow floats, though she does appreciate those. Pride parades are political actions. In fact, the bank-sponsored displays, mainstream political parties marching for publicity, and worst of all, uniformed authority figures are are the parts of Pride that I have the least time for. On the other hand, I supported the 2016 BLM action at Pride in Toronto. I also supported the right of QAIA to march in Toronto Pride parades and was aghast at the municipal interference to silence them. There has never been a time that Pride parades were not fundamentally political actions. Just assume that QAIA is just some radical trans group, perhaps. I forget which. Let's see. Pride parades are, in fact, fundamentally political actions and the sites of political struggle. And depoliticizing things is something capitalism loves because, you can't really make money if things are political. And that's why whenever someone complains about things being too political or partisan these days, all I hear, well, it's not all I hear, but one of the thoughts that runs through my head, along with a groan, is, what are you really complaining about? Like, you could be making more money if people just, simmer down and shut up. What is really wrong here? Except that it hurts profitability or something. We're all not on the same consumerist page. I'm just spitting here. So with that in mind, we should not be surprised to see bigots attempting to use Pride as this vague notion of an event as a site of political struggle now. But I do think it's important to understand who is doing this and why. Hint, it's Nazis. In 2020, 4chan Nazis got some attention for Operation Pridefall, a concerted effort by far-right participants of that hellish site to alienate the general public from the queer community. It's significant to note that children were a perfect preferred target. One participant said, TikTok, convince any Gen Z sibling or relatives to do some kind of crappy gesture, charade, or some kind of whore dance, and then add queer critical captions on top of it and repost. The general operating procedure for Pridefall was to post anti-LGBTQ memes and generally do as much as possible to shift discourse such to present queer people, specifically participating in Pride Month activities, negatively. And wouldn't you know it? But this has become a predominant image shared around the web May 2021, just in time for Pride Month. And it's an image of three guys basically doing puppy play, and a girl is kind of like petting one of them, or it's like interacting with them. So let's be clear about a few realities in this picture. The kinksters, because they are doing something kinky, in it are not touching the girl, menacing her, or causing her any discomfort. The girl in the picture is obviously happy to be there. She's got a flag and several strings of beads on. She's smiling and reaching out to pat the dog man as if it were a puppy. He's acting like a dog. This isn't sexual. It's play. And frankly, it's just play. And frankly, this man is dressed in no more revealing a manner than any number of guys you might encounter on a beach or at a swimming pool. Because, they're wearing harnesses and briefs. Basically the same amounts as swim trunks. So it's something of a mistake to assume that kink is just sex. As many people have pointed out, there is a fair number of asexual people who participate in kink. So by the way, online there were these arguments at the time about the worst of it was like comparing this to someone masturbating in front of a child on a bus or something and saying like, you want to allow this? Or the worst of it was somebody is thinking sexual thoughts to themselves that aren't related to children in any way, but like say whatever kink they're doing. And just doing that around children is like perverted. And it's all about perverts. They're all perverts. Like, what is this? The 50s? Got to watch out for the perverts, but that's exactly how the trans and the swerfs kind of talk about. But really, as this person points out, when it came to, one of these online spaces, you can trace them back to neo-Nazis. People within kink communities refer to their games as scenes, and there is certainly an element of theatricality to some of these scenes. People engaged in kink might and derive sexual pleasure from their activities, but they're definitely either putting on a show or playing games every time. Regardless of if there is any sexual pleasure in it, such kink and is performative and playful pleasure that need not have anything whatever to do with sex. And it's that performative and playful enjoyment that is being displayed in Pride or in public. These three very good boys are playing dog. The little girl, who looks to be around the right age for play acting, is obviously enjoying the scene. Nobody's boundaries are being violated. Nobody is being compelled to do anything. Nobody in the scene is making use of a power differential to impose upon another outside the bounds of adult affirmative consent. But for Nazis, this photo provides great mimetic fodder for a think of the children narrative that is divorced from reality and instead cleaves directly to the revulsions of the straights for the queer. Nazis, using manipulative framing of pictures like this, is the core of this awful discourse. And honestly, it's discourse in May of 2021, but it can repeat ad nauseum, such as the culture war. So, and honestly, we should be reminding any concern trolls popping up that they're carrying water for Nazis. They can go to hell. And concern trolls just don't appear online. Any politician who does a press conference about safety of children, the safety of our communities, a little bit of law and order needed. It's all a type of concern trolling to me, especially because it's a concern troll is like real concern would be about the economic depravity of our times or our war machine or climate change. That's not concern trolling to me when you're concerned about those things. Concerned about sexual violence, real sexual violence, not cherry-pick sexual violence, but actual trends or what the stats bear out as being the biggest kind. So anyway, there's a fair bit of hand-wringing about kids today who don't know how we all struggled. But, sorry, let me go back. So let's talk about the kids. The phrase Puritan has been tossed around for the last few weeks. This is a mythical child who is incensed that their internet experience includes adults who sometimes talk about sex. They share some explicit information or are just, in general, sexual beings. Note, the Puritan isn't a person responding against sexual harassment, but is rather somebody who proactively attempts to censor third parties for engaging in any sexualized behavior in a digital public space. But of course, such Puritan Puritans are all about making sure there's no sexualized content in any public space. So there's a fair bit of hand-wringing about kids today who don't know how we all struggled, but the reality is that these Puritans are really two separate phenomena. One, overly sensitive adolescents, and two, Nazis pretending to be such overly sensitive adolescents. The solution to both is the same. Block, disengage, and if they fall into making overtly bigoted statements, report them. There is nothing to be gained from arguing with children. There is even less to be gained from arguing with 4chan Nazis. The former is not yet at the point where they should have any say in how adults at an adult event comport themselves. The latter should be suffocated under the weight of deafening silence. Now for all the rest. There are also various concern trolls and online entertainers who make money off of inserting themselves into arguments. None of these people should be taken seriously for the simple reason that none of these people have any actual stakes in the argument. They're just in it for the clicks, and I will not mention who these people are because hate clicks are clicks too. Needless to say, there's never a good reason to engage with a Twitch debater. Now this brought mind, now an aside from me, this brought to mind something I wrote a note here. This is a question I wrote. Does a successful left tuber have a stake in the socialist project? So let me walk back why I asked this question. So this writer, Simon, mentions that Twitch debaters, or whatever side of politics they're on, don't really have stakes because they are entertainers first and foremost. The honest ones will handily admit this. And they say, look, I'm here to entertain. It is part of, I'm not saying I'm doing praxis, though I do political advocacy, and that is something that is real and effective, politically speaking. I have a community of a few dozen people, or hundreds, and I politically engage with them in conversations, funny or entertaining, what have you, but it still counts as advocacy, or it becomes advocacy certain times, where it gets beyond just joking about something and being serious. But when it comes to just Twitch debating, it is entertainment, and I see it purely as that, and it's not really political advocacy at a certain point because it's more the act of entertaining and being a scene and playing around is fun, but is sort of meant, I should say, it's separate from being an activist. And so I asked restate the question: does a successful left tuber or left Twitch streamer have a stake in the socialist project? If they're just doing entertainment, do they have a stake in the same way that this, person says that, look, a teenager can be really offended, or not just offended, but like uncomfortable because they're in public spaces and, well, they're not 18 yet. So really, like when a site says this is for 18 plus, they should follow that rule. But then there's spaces like on certain boards or Tumblr where it's all ages. There's no age restriction, though, of course, there are age-restricted buttons and stuff. Like, say, if you go to, but like, the complaint, whether it be real or not, is let's say these overly sensitive adolescents are like, all these adults are bringing in their sexuality into spaces where I just want to be a normal teenager and not really think about sex all the time. Because guess what? That's a stereotype too. So anyway, what about accessibility though? This isn't a thing. I know a fair number of asexual people. As I said, a few of them are into kink. But basically the argument is like this makes, if you make spaces sexualized, you're basically making them inaccessible to those who are not sexual, like the asexual or teenagers or kids. So let's see. The vast majority aren't interested in sex for themselves, but are perfectly happy to see others getting it. The few sex-revolts asexual people I know probably wouldn't ever be interested in attending a pride parade in the first place. See, the push to make pride child-friendly is just garden variety neoliberalism. The semantic signifiers of pride are being decoupled from their original use and repackaged as commodities to sell, cute t-shirts and rainbow flags. This is what led to the discomfort that mainstream society had when actual queer AIA people and with BLM at Pride. Divisive politics at a parade? Where's my fainting couch? This sense is engendered that pride must be for everyone. And that means sanding down all the rough bits. The leather daddies are welcome too, as long as they leave the harness at home. After all, there are children in the audience who might ask questions. The assimilationist wants pride to be an affirmation that society is now okay with the gays. And if people do things that interfere with that, if people express their diverse, strange desires as diverse and as strange, that would put a lie to that affirmation. It would show that, in fact, society is not yet okay with the gays. Society is okay with the abstract idea that some people have otherwise heteronormative relationships with people of their own gender. But please don't be weird about it. And of course, don't be weird about it is defined with a particularly cis-het normative lens. Two men kissing is allowable. We can pretend that one is the girl in the relationship. But drag queens, or heaven forbid, trans women, must be rendered indivisible. If they can't pass, they can't participate. After all, the bounds between kink and play never really existed. So the drag queen who lives entirely in theater, entirely in the domain of play, is thus a figure of fear and disgust. And the transphobes make no distinction between the drag queen and the trans woman, who they are desperate to pathologize, to flatten to a deviancy. The question of kink at Pride is certainly one of access. But it's one that prefers the access of people like me, heteronormative, passable queers, who bring their kids for the party, over the people who still face real obstacles to access everywhere else. Now I need to be clear. I have never seen the risk that my child might see a person in a state of undress or in a state of unusual dress as anything even remotely resembling a barrier of access to pride parades. But remember, when I describe pride as a site of political conflict, I know whose side I'm on here. And the access of trans women and leather daddies is not something that should be denied so that people who already have perfectly reasonable access to the world can continue to glide about with minimal resistance. I reject the premise that the presence of kink, quote unquote, denies access to parents or children. But even if it did, as I said about science fiction conventions before, universal communities don't exist. The Pride Parade is a moment of explicitly political direct action to show that queer people, in all our beautiful and strange diversity, exist. And the access of those who will not pass as normal should be preferred. It is their parade first and foremost. If that means a few sex-discomforted teens feel like they can't access it, then that's a price to pay. One influential online personality argued that Pride should be as open as possible to help normalize queer desire. This guy is in much the same boat as me, in that he's so normal presenting I didn't actually realize he wasn't straight. This personality is, as usual, dead wrong. Forget respectability. Coddling normies doesn't move the struggle for liberation. Rights aren't granted, they are taken. Now this gets to my last point. A kinkster I know pointed out that this whole argument was silly because they're going to turn up in March anyway. They'll come out with their harnesses, cuffs, and collars. They'll come out with their dog masks, rings affixed around their chains. It won't matter if some children on Twitter don't think they should be there because of this. Drag queens or whatever know their right to present as they do has nothing to do with permission. Something is a right when it cannot be taken from you. If it's a conditional acceptance extended as long as you're not weird about it, then it isn't a right. The Pride March has always been about creating a right. The old phrase is, we're here, we're queer, get used to it. Not, we're here, we're queer, please like us. It is a show of force, a presentation that some strangeness will not be surrendered. If you want an all ages, desexed Pride event, make your own. But in the meantime, don't expect you will stop any of the nonconforming from marching. So that was Simon McNeil, author. I guess, I don't know if it's a book or it's just his blog, Black Trillium. So there, I like that a lot. Kind of gets to the heart of a bunch of things. Hopefully it wasn't too much saying the S word there a lot. But obviously being transgressive. Oh, that was another little joke I'll end the hour with. When someone was being really edgy, and I said like, and it was I think it was a trans woman or something, and I said like, wow, so transgressive, and somebody thought they didn't know, they'd probably never, it was likely some type of teen who had never read or seen the word transgressive before, and they thought I was like combining trans with aggressive, and they were like, what did you just say? And, because it would be like an insult kind of thing, like, whoa, trans aggressive much. Oh, these trans women, they're all so edgy and, angry. They're all so angry. But no, transgressive means to transgress on norms. A formative book in my college years was, that I have is, Teaching to Transgress by Bell Hooks. I don't have other Bell Hooks works, but obviously she's a great writer and she's often shared. Good. So that wraps up the first hour of the show. This has been the Three Lefts. I will see you in the other side of the hour. I could start early. So in the second half, I'm going to cover TERFs in the Green Party and UK. Okay, welcome back to the second hour of the Three Left Show. I'm your host, Daniel Platt. I'll start the second hour by talking a little bit about what I did today. I helped facilitate a discussion. Let's start from the beginning. There's a general consensus among society on all levels and persuasions that teaching to the test, standardized testing, bad, not working, not preparing kids for the future. That our Prussian system of regimented factory-type schooling is not actually a good education. Education is separate from schooling, that we need an education system that is less like quote-unquote school, something where you're in classes and team, whatever. I don't want to get into all that, but there were protests against standardized testing and whatever, and there was an opt-out movement that was mostly on the right, unfortunately. I think it could have been more widespread, but it was kind of like once the right starts doing something, like it doesn't make sense. It doesn't feel right. I don't know for liberals and leftists to do it too, but it's usually because the reason they do something that we might do, mostly because we don't do it because we're not prepared, or the movement isn't built. it's an odd thing. Can't really get into it because I'm not prepared to talk about it. What I am prepared to talk about is that we need a education system that uses a more not experience-based, performative-based assessment. But anyway, this is something that has been carried up to the state level in New York. Here in New York, we have basically our education standards are governed and ruled over by a body called the Board of Regents. It's because, when you graduate, you get a Regents diploma, and you take the Regents tests to basically graduate. And so in the last, this was a process that was supposed to start in 2020, their public input period to redo the graduation requirements. That is what's at stake right now. And they're wrapping up their public input periods. At least they had regional meetings that they restarted again in the winter of recently, and they're wrapping up the final kind of public stakeholder meetings, which was like 200 people, and I was facilitating one of the breakout groups of roughly 5 people. I was expecting 7, but whatever. I think it was 7 at the end of the day. Anyway, general consensus so it was a group of higher education people. It was business leaders in higher education in this section of a big public meeting over Zoom, of course. It was easier that way. You can get a lot more participation that way. The general consensus among higher education types is to have, and this I'm pleased because this is my position too, that we need portfolio-based assessments where students do projects based on their interests and where they want to go in life. And the projects can also be, have a criteria of, basic citizenship, financial literacy things. The project can be this, project can be that. So there can be types of projects that need to be included, but generally the students figure out what the projects will be as they go, and based on their interests, and those projects can then be judged by a panel of teachers. And the portfolio can be built over their entire career as students, not just year to year, school to school, but it's something they carry with them and can actually use as part of basically it will be their resume, because usually once you get into the workforce, everything you've done in school suddenly means nothing. Anyway, back to the topic at hand, which are TERFs, TERFs in the Green Party, TERFs in the UK, and general trans rights issues. First, I want to hit really quickly, it will be quick, a paper published by Cultural Anthropology. I was able to download it all, did not read it, unfortunately. Sorry, I'm a poor host. I didn't do the homework. I didn't read it. Too much else going on with my life. But it is called Deep in the Brain, Identity and Authenticity in Pediatric Gender Transition. That means, kids under 18. And that's one of the things that gets, think of the children. These children, they're transitioning very young, or they're figuring out their gender identity as they hit puberty, or even before they hit puberty, or they delay puberty so they can figure out whether or not they're the right gender, or how they will present, because these things can be. So anyway, I'm just going to read the abstract, which is, the summary. Based on an ethnography of clinical practices, survey, around gender nonconforming and transgender children in the U.S., this article explores the cultural and scientific notions of identity that shape this field. It examines the practice of diagnosing true gender identity in the clinic and situates the search for the foundation of identity in the inner depths of the self, and in children as harbingers of authenticity as part of a broader cultural history. It addresses the scientific substantiation of the faith in innateness, that they are born this way, as well as the interiority, which is that gender identity comes from within, or the interiority, meaning that identity comes from within, as well as their political appeal. This article challenges the often taken for granted association of science with materialism and the distribution of matter idea along with a nature-culture axis, meaning that, nature versus nurture, what determines someone's identity? Is it how they're brought up, or is it their genes? So this article kind of goes into the problems with just having this nature-culture axis, a line, like a number line. By demonstrating the idealism that drives the citing of identity in the brain, saying that this is all materialistic, it's in the brain, it's neurochemicals, that's actually kind of idealistic too. which is kind of how TERFs come at things, saying they're being the materialists. They're the ones looking at biology, and then biology is sex, and thus thinking of things as it's a sexual determinism, or a biological determinism, or environmental determinism, which it's all pretty dangerous to do, but not just dangerous. It's inaccurate. It's not really good to do just one type of, any kind of determinism is kind of a problem. Why? So here's what they discuss. Finally, they question the assumption that it is the appeal of nature and biology that underlies the cultural attachment to entities such as the gene and the brain as locations for where identity comes from, rather than a nature-culture dyad, duo, or, a dialectic between the two, a relationship between nature and culture. This article argues that it's more of an internal-external dyad, it's this paradigm that accurately captures and explains this cultural attachment, meaning I'm this gender identity regardless of what organs I have. That's kind of interesting. Kind of reminds me also of when I took aesthetics. Aesthetics, the philosophical study of beauty, like what makes something beautiful. And the professor there had his theory of beauty was also using this kind of dyad, that there are we have experiences, and we can objectively talk about them in terms of how this experience is an internal experience, or this experience is an external experience, or at least that's one of the axes. He had a number of axes that something's pleasurable versus painful, or, it's just a way of talking about, like, you could measure aesthetic experiences, that, experiencing the smell of garbage is a very strong aesthetic experience, but it's one of disgust, but it's still an aesthetic experience. Also, looking at a beautiful symmetrical building is an aesthetic experience, but depending on one's internal culture, it could be boring. Okay, a lot of different topics flying about there. Hope I get across why I started with this, because I'm going to go about. I may return to this one. I have in front of me an article. Yeah, I guess it's an article, and it is written. It's a site called 4W, which is, I would consider a TERF site. For TERF, it's TERF News. And instead of reading this and trying to debunk it, because I haven't done the research, so to speak, that's not the kind of show this is. The articles are the research, which is, of course, makes me on Tim Pool level journalism here. There are streams where they go through an article like this and go through all of the inaccurate things about it, not just because they're misrepresenting the reality of situations, like when someone's like, "Oh, they kicked me." It's like, what do you mean they kicked you? And it's like, when you actually look at what happened, they didn't actually get kicked or something. In this case, it's Oregon teachers who have been reprimanded for speaking out about gender identity politics. They put out resolutions, and they created their own little organization to basically resolve the transgender issue. And it's like saying there's a problem that needs to be solved. Like there needs to be a final solution to trans kids, or some, But they got a lot of pushback, and they're like, we're being persecuted. And we're being ostracized. And it all sounds really, if you read enough of their content, you really do get like this. When you look at one point of view and one point of view only, you can really always kind of say like, oh yeah, these trans activists truly are horrible people, a force of violence and hate, and they're the real villains in this story. But that's never really what's happening. But I can't accurately portray this, so I'm going to move on to actually I do have both sides here, so I can accurately explain cover what I'm talking about. First, this is stronger, TERFism, so to speak, is stronger in the UK, and thus I will turn to a Guardian piece in their sports blog section, an article more than 9 months old that tells me, yes, because I saved all of these in the last 2 years at least. This is from June 2021, but this is a debate, whatever. It's a public conversation that has not yet been resolved and has been going for the last few years. It is transgenders in sports, the trans in sports. So here is, I'm going to read it in full. Maybe I'll, trans myself over to a funny voice territory. I'm not sure. So it's by Tanya Alfred. By conflating gender and sex, we undermine sporting competition. Now, this is the thing that's mentioned by the gender critical over and over again, that what my side, the trans side, the leftist side, I will blatantly say, is that we are conflating gender and sex, which to me is a mischaracterization. I don't know what they're talking about, that they're conflating gender and sex. But I suppose what they're really referring to is why, like the original thing I started with in the last hour, that the courts ruled that, by discriminating someone based on their gender role or their gender presentation, it also counts as sex discrimination, because you're discriminating based on a sex role or what their perceived sex is. To say that perception is as important as the reality. Because when it comes to social issues, it is important. So we're always conflating gender and sex in a fact that they're both like a realm of to give people rights, gender rights and sex rights. And it seems really patriarchal to me, or regressive, to say that sex and gender are the same thing. To say that if you have this sex, you must have this gender. You must have these gender roles, or if not gender roles, but you must have this gender expression. Why? Because it hurts the kids somehow. And again, it goes back to, it hurts the kids because of this cherry-picked example, which is just anecdotes and not real data. So fairness, okay, but now let's talk about the sports, where again, it's like the data doesn't support what this article is going to, or what this opinion piece is going to lay out. But let me go through it anyway. Fairness is at the heart of sport, and without separate categories for the sexes, there would be no women in Olympic finals. This is the straw man that's painted. So what is fairness? In sport, everything. From childhood, we come to see the head start in the playground race, the shove in the goal mouth, a rogue thumb on the egg, as unjust, and quickly shout, "Oi! Object." I guess she's talking about British sports. Maybe these are all rugby terms. The same sense of probity works its way up into professional sport. Sandpapering a cricket ball, not fair. Boxing with loaded gloves, not fair. International misrepresentation in paramilitary classification, not fair. Colluding with betting syndicates to fix a result, not fair. Doping, not fair. We classify our sports in order to pitch like against like and keep people safe. Yes, the zebras must stay with the zebras, the lions with the lions, the hyenas with the hyenas. Anyway, heavyweight boxers never fight flyweights. From puberty, the sexes compete separately in most sports most of the time. These are long accepted norms. Or were. Their times are changing. Laurel Hubbard, 43, is poised to become the first transgender Olympian after being picked for New Zealand's weightlifting team, bubbling up to be one of Tokyo's big stories. This fixes the spotlight on to whether trans women have an unfair advantage over biological women, and pits those sometimes friends, sometimes foes, inclusion and fairness. By conflating gender and sex, I would argue we fudge the very reason we have sex categories in sports, the male performance advantage. Without a separate category for females, by the way, this is a common joke amongst my type that instead of saying women, regressive people use female. Females, Ferengis. There would be no women in Olympic finals. But see, this is where they're conflating sex and gender. Because see, when we use woman and man, we're referring to sex. If we say male and female, we're referring to gender. They use them interchangeably, which causes me confusion. Just as we can cause regressive people reactionaries confusion. So even in the 100-meter, one of the events with the smallest performance gap, approximately 10,000 men worldwide have professional bests faster than the current Olympic female champion, Elaine Thompson-Herah. And it's not just track and field. While the smallest attainment gap between the sexes comes in running, rowing, and swimming events, which is between 11 to 13%, this moves up to 16 to 22% in track cycling, between 29% to 43% when it comes to bowling, cricket, balls, and weightlifting. The difference in punch power between men and women is a whopping 162%, not then to be sniffed at. But the International Olympic Committee, and by the way, they're important because the standards they set for the Olympic Games become basically the standards for all sports. They tweaked their guidelines in 2015 to allow athletes such as Hubbard to compete in the women's category, provided their total testosterone level in serum is kept below 10 nanomoles per liter for at least 12 months. Transgender men face no restrictions in the male category for obvious reasons. Oh, okay, so at least you don't have a problem with that. So increasingly, however, research is showing that these testosterone guidelines do not guarantee the fair competition the IOC was hoping for. Well, that's your opinion, man. So anyway, Ross Tucker, a sports scientist and expert on testosterone advantage in sport, successfully sums it up. That lowering of testosterone is almost completely ineffective in taking away the biological differences between males and females. There is just no proof that reducing testosterone takes away the advantage of muscle mass, strength, lean body mass, muscle size, or bone density. I don't know what basis there is to make that statement, by the way, folks. I'm pretty sure that how much estrogen or testosterone you have, actually, it is all pretty much relative on the other hand. So, but when people talk of doing HRT, replacing their hormones, they go on estrogen or they take testosterone, they talk of how, I'm talking about trans people here, they talk of how their muscle mass changed and how their bone density changed and how everything freaking changed. And this guy's saying, like, oh, no, you change your hormones and nothing changes. Now, hormone levels for somebody is the normal amount for that person, right? There is no, normal male amount of testosterone. Like, there was this thing where, these 5 guys got testosterone tests, and they were all wildly different. And it's like, oh, you have 200, but I have 500. I'm like, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. So... and it also varies day to day. So the most common argument used in favor of inclusion is that sport is all about natural advantage and that being a trans woman is just another factor to add to the list alongside Michael Phelps' size. In favor of inclusion is that sport is all about natural advantage and that being a trans woman is just another factor to add to a long list, like how Michael Phelps had large feet and double-jointed ankles, and that made him a very great swimmer, so he won all the medals, a lot of medals. So the problem with this argument is that we don't compete according to foot size. But why shouldn't we? Why shouldn't we have swimmers compete based on foot size then? But we do protect the integrity of women's sport because the advantage gained from male puberty is so comprehensive in terms of speed, power, strength. Again, this is just a claim at that point, claim that needs evidence. So male puberty gave him a much bigger, talking about Phelps, his male puberty gave him a much bigger advantage across the board. At the Beijing Olympics, he won the 200-meter freestyle, breaking the world record. Frederica, a woman swimmer who broke women's world record at the same distance, finished at 1.54 seconds versus Phelps' 1.42 seconds, a time that wouldn't have got her into the men's semifinals. It wasn't internalized misogyny slowing her down. Okay. Serena Williams told David Letterman that were she to play Andy Murray, I would lose 6-0, 6-0 in maybe 10 minutes. Well, of course, that's just a claim. Again, it's like, well, she hasn't. Male puberty and androgens give an advantage in a different stratosphere, which to me is like saying, yeah, men are inherently stronger and different than women. And thus, which is an inherently anti-feminist statement to say that there can be no equity between men and women. Men are just stronger. They should just do all the strong jobs. Like, no women garbage collectors. Women shouldn't be able to do these things that, lift more. Even though then by lifting more, they get more back injuries. So they're not inherently stronger then, is the result of actually including women in any kind of job, whether it involves lifting things or not. So that's my take, that it's inherently anti-feminist to just talk of like how much stronger men are. It's just that we have to keep things separate. Gotta keep things separate for the sake of safety and fairness. Wasn't this all probably said about blacks in sports? We gotta keep them separate because blacks are inherently faster. They're all faster than white men, so it wouldn't be fair if they were allowed to compete. They would take over those sports. Ugh. So anyway, given the safety issues in combat, collision, and some team sports, given the hidden exclusions, those women and girls who decide that a sport now isn't for them, and the not-so-hidden ones, a 20-year-old Tongan who would have gone to her first Olympics if Hubert hadn't been selected, which is like saying, Hubbard, the trans woman, isn't a real woman, so doesn't count. Now there's this other woman who wasn't selected. Yeah. The American cyclist Veronica Ivy, previously known as Rachel McKinnon, says hang the heartache, trans women are women and should simply be able to self-identify themselves into the woman's category at every level. This argument has got some traction, in which case, why bother having sex categories for sport at all? Okay, so just put everyone in together and watch biological males win the lot. I'd argue the opposite. The science is young. Stop, breathe. Trans women should be able to live their sporting lives to the fullest. So if research can find a way for them to participate in female sports without advantage, brilliant. Until then, remove the idea of gender altogether and revert to sex-based categories. A female category, get this, an open category that can cater for trans men who have taken testosterone, trans women, and men. So trans men can still be in the male category, but it's women who need to be protected from trans women. And that's an open category. You have a women's category and an everybody else category. That doesn't sound like equitable intersectional feminism to me. So, but above all, there needs to be a realization that you can't always have it all. Just as women and trans men can't dominate in men's sports and men can't enter women's sport, because trans women are actually men. Trans women shouldn't be able to push open a door that was locked for a reason. It isn't fair. Okay. So besides my little ramblings, now for an actual retort, via Facebook page, which I will link in the show notes. But it's basically a post made by someone saying trans girls competing is not unfair. So, as a result of things I just read and that kind of advocacy, at least 25 U.S. states are proposing anti-trans sports bills, most of which target trans girls. Even folks who claim they are not transphobic and support trans people take issue when a trans girl wants to compete with other girls. This is often bigotry, masked as caring about fairness. So let's break this down. Quote, it's not transphobic, it's about fairness. Trans women are biological males and shouldn't compete with women. So let's start with language. If you claim you're not transphobic, then you will use the most respectful terminology and call trans women what they are, women. To put my spin on it, or a spin I've heard, that it's a matter of being a type of woman. Okay, type of woman is a subcategory, but still under the umbrella of being women. So calling them biological males is not only potentially inaccurate, because biological sex is not actually that simple, but it's also transphobic. If you need to differentiate trans and cis women, say that. Trans and cis women. If you need to talk about folks with higher levels of testosterone, say that. If you need to talk about reproductive biology, then say that. Point 2, quote, And by the way, it's starting with a statement and then it's rebutting it. Excluding trans girls protects girls' sport. Response. In order to exclude trans girls, there must be a method of verifying if someone is trans. Usually this is done through genital exams, hormone evaluation, and or genetic testing. Most bills propose accusation-based testing. When someone is accused of being trans, they are subject to testing. This not only demonizes and weaponizes transness, but it also endangers all girls and women. That is, any girl accused of being transgender, because maybe they're muscular or they're buff or they are tall, that can be checked. Or maybe they just have a bony chin or a bony face, or they have some masculine features. Not only is this incredibly invasive, genital exams are wholly unnecessary. Having or not having genitals, male genitals, has no effect on performance in sport. Having a penis has no effect anyway. But it also is degrading to all women. That is, at what point is a girl good enough that she will then be accused of being transgender? How masculine can a girl be or look before she is accused of being transgender? This proposed gender verification not only symmetrically enforces the policing of all women's bodies, but also does so through demonizing and weaponizing transness. And this is kind of the thing with the TERF opinion pieces or news stories even, that they're always leaving out the actual material effects and consequences of what they're advocating for. Because to them, the ends justify the means. And the ends is erasing transness, erasing queerness, erasing the non-conforming. You're a man or a woman. Because otherwise, that's the only way. How do you know who the enemy is if you don't know who's a man? That's what I hear. Because, in their ideology, men are just evil beings who can do no right. On to point 3. Trans women have higher levels of testosterone, so it's unfair, as mentioned before. So, the response to this would be, at non-elite levels, it does not matter. We're talking about children who just want to kick a ball around with their friends. Most athletes are not Olympians, national team members, or even going to compete in regional level meets. Though I'm not sure this is great rhetoric because, anyone who's in sport is and serious about it wants to go up to those levels, which is the argument they make. But in that point, it's all about winning competitions, and besides saying I'm the best, I think we're moving in towards a society where that matters less and less. Example, team sports are just becoming less popular. There is just less and less participation in team sports on the high school and other levels and lower than that. Why? Because we're all gaming. We all want to do more cooperative type of games, not competitive games. When I play tennis, because it's one-on-one, it's not really part of a team. It's for the fun of it. And so does most other sporting activities. Anyway, these are just kids playing sports with their friends. And on all elite level sports, such as those governed by the NCAA or the International Olympic Committee, testosterone levels must be regulated for trans women to compete. That regulation is already happening. It's, but the opinion piece argued this isn't enough or it's not working or something. But the evidence, and just as much reporting, if not more, reports that it has the intended effect. The intended fairness is there. But going through testosterone-driven puberty still makes them taller, even if they're on hormone blockers. Let's continue with that. On to point 4 then. But even if testosterone levels are regulated, trans women go through testosterone-driven puberty. They're taller and bigger. Well, first off, many trans girls take puberty, meaning hormone blockers, and therefore have never experienced this testosterone-driven puberty, and this argument is null. But what about those who have? Well, let's think about a 6'3" cisgender woman who plays basketball. People will say, damn, she was made for basketball. Now let's say there is a 6' trans woman. People often immediately say that's unfair. The reality is these accusations are often transphobic. They're sexist and misogynist, because a trans woman's gender expression is often accused of being too masculine or manly. And a lot of the time, it's also racist. It can be. Because many of these trans women who have been attacked are black and brown, which is not a coincidence. This is the repeated shaming and policing of black and brown women's bodies in sports, and this is not new. Think of Serena Williams, that's the second time she's been evoked, and many other black women whose bodies have been repeatedly policed in the sport. Point 5. Trans women have unfair biological advantages. Don't forget that biological differences exist everywhere in sports. No two athletes' bodies look the same. No two cisgender women's bodies look the same, and they shouldn't have to. The shortest guy on my swim team is 5'6". The tallest guy was 6'7". That means the shortest guy was more than a foot shorter than that tallest guy. Is that height a biological advantage? Of course it is. But is it unfair and meriting of disqualification? Of course not. It's just a biological difference. It's also worth noting that the guy who was 5'6" was one of the fastest swimmers we had, and he was the captain in senior year. So yes, trans women absolutely can exhibit biological diversity, just like everyone else. I'm not transphobic. I just care about fairness. Point 6. In the Women's Sports Foundation 2020 report, Chasing Equity on Barriers to Sport for Women, the inclusion of trans women is not mentioned once. Trans women do not threaten the fabric of women's sports. Excluding and attacking trans women does. That is, so many folks don't care about sports or fairness until a trans woman wants to play. And then suddenly, they are massive sports fans. If folks truly want to bring fairness to the forefront, they'd fight against the main barrier to access for sports, which is, say it with me, fellow leftists, socioeconomic disparity. Class, often intertwined with systemic oppressions such as race. This will be the last. So it's a call to action. I don't know if I have to go through it, but South Carolina Senate just passed such a bill that bans trans girls from all sports and require all kids competing in sports to disclose their genetic and reproductive biology to the government. So much for freedom. Republicans loving freedom. You just have to register your danglies with them. Okay. Holy moly, wow. I did not expect that to take that long. Okay, so I'm going to have to steam through this. First, to Pink News. Going to the UK, Sean Barry thinks you should reconsider being in the Green Party if you don't believe trans rights are human rights. The rest of the hour, I will mostly be hitting on trans or TERFs in the Green Party and how one of the things that we had a lot of factionalism in the Green Party, and it did really hurt us. Factionalism does, in fact, party discipline, lack of party discipline really hurts. And it was mostly through the electoral strategies I've discussed over and over in other episodes. So I consider the TERF split in the Green Party to be very, very minor lack of, factionalism compared to the factionalism of we got to vote for Biden to get rid of Trump. The Greens shouldn't run a presidential candidate, or the Greens shouldn't, run against Democrats at all or something. We can go over that over and over. But now we're just talking about that because, these are radical feminists. They have leftist politics in many other domains, such as economic, which is why it's really important to point out that, look, if you really want to help women, don't fight trans women or trans folks. Just keep fighting for economic equality or economic justice with us being the rest of us woke, transgenderism leftists. But no, that as soon as this disagreement comes forward, it's like all of that other stuff, that economic justice, democracy, it all doesn't seem to matter. It's something to split. It's something to leave and fight over. So here's an example of that. So Sean Barry, the Green Party candidate for mayor of London, has said a commission and action plan on trans rights will be one of the first things she'll do if elected. This is back in February of last year. So on Wednesday, the Green Party co-leader, who is vying to replace Mayor Khan in the May election, pledged that if elected, she would set up a commission on the needs of trans Londoners and create an action plan to address barriers to healthcare, employment, and housing. Her strategy, she said, is to make London the most trans-inclusive city in the world. So discussing a timescale of her plan, there is no reason why something like this should take more than a few months. Just a commission kind of thing, you know? Since Barry joined the London Assembly in 2016, she said she has seen the conversation around trans rights move in the wrong direction. Quoting her, "When I first came to the London Assembly," so she is an elected Green, "I thought we were in a very good position with trans rights. Sea changes had happened, that trans people were being normalized, and that we were doing a tidying up exercise. So I came into the Assembly with this mission to clear the final thing and just push the final barriers that were there." She said she worked on issues like expanding gender options on forms with Greater London authorities, but that now things have moved the wrong direction. Since I've been in the London Assembly, there's been a growth in a particularly toxic transphobia. Attempts being made at a national level to roll back trans rights and objections to things that I would never have imagined would be objected to. Things like provision of gender-neutral toilets. It just seems like common sense to me. Now, there's been an enormous amount of toxic rhetoric that I do not like. I just think it's upsetting that we've seen everyone's human rights pushed back on, but it's particularly upsetting to me how toxic the attempts are that are being made at the moment to alienate and exclude trans people. Okay, I need to work really fast, but this is just, you get the sense of this. Things are really bad in the UK. This candidate, Green Candidate, is mentioning it. Quick run through of the disaccreditation of the Georgia Green Party. So this is something I've referred to here and there in particularly last year, but I haven't really gotten into the details because I haven't really had it in front of me. Now I do. Here is a statement put out by the Green Party of Washington State Coordinating Council, which voted to direct its national committee delegates to vote yes on a proposal 1062, which discredits, it basically says the Georgia Green Party no longer part of the National Greens. During the course of the discussion debate, it has become clear that the platform planks which the Georgia Green Party adopted regarding queer LGBTQ+ community, particularly trans women and children, are non-alignment with the positions of the Green Party of Washington State. And so they basically say, this is why we're going to vote. We agree with our colleagues in Wisconsin when they ask, should the Green Party be a safe space for intolerance? And we agree with their conclusion. If so, then we can no longer claim to be a tolerant organization, and the progressives and leftists we are hoping to recruit will find another political home. Therefore, the only tenable choice is to repudiate intolerance, to say that TERFs are being bigots, that they are being reactionaries. We spent years hoping the National Lavender Green Caucus and the Georgia Green Party would be able to resolve this issue. The Lavender Caucus is the Trans Caucus, and they were not able to do so. We are not being tasked to resolve the issue and determine the future of our party. And that is a party that supports trans rights. Here is the national, going to the Green US site, which has the full background of the vote of this resolution. That's the proposal 1062, which discredits the Georgia Green Party. So here's the background. This committee asserts that the Georgia Green Party has established a pattern of undemocratic actions that violate the 10 values of grassroots democracy, as well as exhibiting bigoted and anti-transgender positions that violate the key value of social justice and equal opportunity. Therefore, the Georgia Green Party is not organized or run in accordance with our values. So the Georgia Green Party passed a series of resolutions and state platform amendments at their Bullier State Convention, February 2020, that would seek to restrict the full legal and political rights of transgender people. It was like a TERF manifesto. So at that meeting, they endorsed the Declaration on Women's Sex-Based Rights, which, among other things, states that, quote, men who claim a female gender identity are being enabled to access opportunities and protections set aside for women. This constitutes a form of discrimination against women and endangers women's fundamental rights to safety, dignity, and equality. Conversely, the Green Party platform states, the Green Party affirms the rights of all persons to self-determination with regard to gender identity and sex. We affirm the right of choosing non-binary and gender-fluid identification also. We therefore support the right of individuals to be free from coercion and involuntary assignment of gender or sex. While the platform is not a binding document, it does represent a democratically ratified consensus of views regarding transgender persons. It is often a fair representation of the values that newcomers to the party would expect to see lived out in state and local parties. The Green members across the country accept the platform as one of the key recruitment tools at our disposal. So at that February 2020 meeting, only 9 members were reportedly present, which appeared to be at least a subset of the state coordinating council. The absence of rank-and-file members to vote on such a seismic platform amendment lends the appearance of only a select group were invited to weigh in on the decision. In fact, no state meeting was ever announced on Facebook, and which is in fact a method that most state parties use to cast a wider net and attract more attendees to state meetings. There is a page announcing this meeting buried in the website with no other way to navigate to it, though. So according to the last known bylaws of the Georgia Green Party, quote, the convention may establish organizing policy, and it goes through the rigmarole. So let's see. They endorse the thing. So the accreditation committee has made repeated requests that the Georgia Green Party to provide a membership roster or the number of due-paying members, as well as a current copy of their bylaws. After the AC's vote, accreditation committee, whether to recommend this their disaccreditation was initiated, meaning we're going to investigate. Georgia Green Party finally responded on this point that the Georgia Secretary of State has a copy of their bylaws on file. However, it goes through basically the runaround. In the meantime, there is no evidence that the Georgia Green Party is empowering members of the queer community. In fact, in testimony from former member Abby Thatcher of Savannah, who is a transgender woman, unchecked trans misogynistic commentary from the state committee members was a regular occurrence. Additionally, Thatcher testified that after repeated requests, Georgia Green Party would not cancel her dues and continue to withdraw them from her bank account. In the meantime, the National Lavender Green Caucus, in an effort to return Georgia's platform to a version more in line with the Nationals, requested mediation via a dispute resolution committee. Ultimately, from the initial acceptance of mediation, approximately April 16, 2020, and after repeated instances of communication through the assigned mediator, Georgia Green Party failed to complete the process of mediation and dialogue. And then they ignored their final and third notice that was issued October. So this is over a whole year. So the following is a list of events and deadlines that was observed by the accreditation committee as part of this grievance process. So it goes through basically, a list of events. So there's a kind of a paper trail. And thus it proposes that they be discredited, which they were, which is thus why I read the Washington State announcement of that. Now last, I'm going to round out the episode. I may actually go long, but I want to read this final few paragraphs that I will leave you with this final word. He's the Green Party organizer in North Carolina, Antonio Nage. Read him before. Really like his works. Okay. Final word. The oppressed need solidarity and power, not protection. So this is on building mass power versus sex-based rights. The concept of sex-based rights, such as those espoused in the Declaration of Women's Sex-Based Rights, is inherently right-wing. Evidently, the vast majority of women seem to agree, given the fact that it is several years old and still has less than 20,000 international signees. How is this concept of sex-based rights right-wing or reactionary? Question mark. This manipulative obfuscation of what is basically anti-trans fear-mongering upholds the concept that equal rights protections uphold special rights for women that are being eroded. Would someone call affirmative action and the Civil Rights Act race-based rights? That would totally play into the agenda of racists, wouldn't it? This rhetoric also helps to support the right-wing narrative that equal rights protections and affirmative action are somehow taking away from the rights of hardworking white people, etc. It's the exact same style propaganda as the anti-trans activists, except white conservatives are saying that their rights are being eroded. When serious radicals stand up to defend trans people from this warped version of feminism, we are summarily labeled as IDPol liberals, cancer culture fascists, and social justice warriors. just like people who defend the BLM movement are labeled the same way. This is classic right-wing propaganda, to lump people fighting for liberation in with the most opportunistic or undisciplined elements of the struggle. This serves as a convenient distraction from their own bigotry and opportunism, just as only a tiny percentage of white supremacists openly say that they don't like black people. Even many KKK members say they simply want segregation of the races to protect the survival of the white race, their race-based rights, if you will. Now, of course, not everyone who injects themselves into the BLM struggle or whatever struggle is always doing the right thing or without contradiction or representing the right interests. We have seen the base opportunism and tokenism of both ruling capitalist parties in this regard. That is different, one that many of us have been involved with as well. However, I know one thing, that people who stand against the movement for black and brown lives are overwhelmingly reactionary in their politics. This is why I'm a socialist. I do not feel that a society based upon economic and productive planning for people and planet is in competition with my own rights. Quite the opposite. Such a means of social organization is key to winning permanent liberation. The rights of everyone do not compete with my rights in such a system that is not based upon profit over cooperation. The solution proposed is one where we punch down to protect our rights within this exploitative system under capitalism, which is a dictatorship of Wall Street. All of our rights are ultimately on borrowed time until the point at which we challenge that order. Then all of these constitutional protections are easily discarded. One needs to only look at the militarized response to home foreclosure resistance and the violent crackdowns against Occupy Wall Street during the last economic crisis to see just the tip of the iceberg of what's in store for us when we do rise up en masse. So when one class of people wins rights against the exploitative interests of the ruling class, we all do. Such equal rights strengthen solidarity. Punching down at a population that is presently less than 1%, referring to trans folks, as if they are seeking to take away or claim the rights of women, erodes solidarity. You don't have to personally agree. You just need to understand that solidarity is what is paramount. The historical foundation of capitalist rule rests upon the utilization of oppression of women, races, and nationalisms to culturally and very intentionally divide and conquer. It's interesting that the focus of the anti-trans activists are those without the social power or material means to uphold any of these systemic pillars of exploitation and oppression. You know, they just see banks waving rainbow flags, and this apparently makes them on the same team. But as I mentioned with the kink at Pride, that's a political struggle too that it doesn't erode it. Doesn't take anything from us. Cisgender women and trans men, as well as the entire queer spectrum, are all targeted by the patriarchy and are all subjected to patriarchal violence. The funny thing here is that folks who use the shield of sex-based rights against trans people, the same way people who are racist and say that white people are under attack, billionaires are under attack, are on the same side of this issue as the most vile anti-woman sexists in our society. It almost seems as if they are proudly so. Easier to punch down than to engage in the long, hard work of building mass solidarity. Mic drop. So if it needs bearing, the audio is going to be different here because this is future, or rather editing Daniel. Just wanted to repeat the thesis of that statement, that little screed there, which is that the oppressed need solidarity, not derision and what have you, or protection rather. And that protection, the oppressed, includes me, you, and anybody who doesn't have $1 million worth in assets. It does mean women, it means cis women, it means trans women, it means everybody. It means men, cis, trans, what have you. So it can also tie back into the beginning when I mentioned the Will Smith, Chris Rock slap, in that what the wife of Will Smith needed was not his protection via a slap to the face and, standing up for her with violence, whether it be, just personal violence, but solidarity. which could have been in the form of mentioning it during his speech or something like that, or a statement afterwards and addressing it that way. I mean, he had a platform. But this is all covered by some other commentators, one of which I will be linking in the show notes. But I can summarize that, let's see, one kind of note that, the defending of your woman sure looks like patriarchal violence. And that kind of violence, that whole Will Smith just needed to feel manly or feel in control of the situation. And he did that with a slap, which, of course, is what any man perpetrating domestic violence or sexual violence against women is also doing. So it's all, somehow it all looks like patriarchal violence to me. The other side of it is that, this is not, in fact, protecting women, just as bashing and suppressing or pressing trans women or trans people is not protecting women at all. Because what really protects us is solidarity. Solidarity with workers, solidarity with the non-conforming. And that helps us all. It does not hurt our rights. In fact, it enhances them. It makes them more than privileges. So with that, I will round up the show. Just want to give my profound thanks for listening. You can send feedback or encouragement, follow and share me on my socials. That's on Facebook, The 3 Left Show, Twitter. You can email me at 3leftshow. That's lefts, plural 3, numeral 3, lefts show at Gmail. Also materially, you can find me on Patreon and LibrePay to support the show materially. That means with cash, of course. The full archive and more episodes are at 3lefts.news. And the show can also be found on all podcast and music applications. You can also support this radio station, WCAALP, at grandarts.org. And of course, the most important thing is to put the ideas, thinking, and projects talked about here in practice yourself. So be well, keep waving the flags of the 3 lefts.